Have you ever considered what eternity means? We all know it in the colloquial sense. I've waited an eternity for the bus. I won't take my exam for an eternity. We'll have to stand an eternity in this queue. But this is all very different from an eternity in its literal sense. An eternity in its literal sense is perhaps best viewed from mathematics. To be more precise, the Euclidean geometry and its definition of a line. A line in Euclidean geometry is a dot that is stretched in both ends, in the upper end and in the lower end, or in the left and the right end, all depending on how you view it. This means in essence that however far you travel along this line, the property of being stretched apply equally in both directions. So after having travelled for say the distance of 1 billion light years along the line in the direction upwards, you have not progressed the least in any direction, save for your own position 1 billion light years back down. So there can only be a relative progress in your travel. That is, if we let your starting point constitute a coordinate of reference. Your progression is then best described as a fixed state of rise or decline. Now, eternity is a major concept in theology. As a matter of fact, it is an antecedent to both the doctrine of creation and apocalypse. Creation took place ex nihilo, that is, from the eternity of God, and the apocalypse is seen as the remerge of time, that is, temporal progression, and eternity, that is, the solipsistic mind of God. From the viewpoint of a believer then, his coordinate in the continuum of eternity starts right there in the apocalypse, and after that he will be in a fixed state of progressing merge with God. Since the being of God is seen as eternal, this merge can really be a continuous elevation, the rise to ever new heights of bliss and insight. For those not so lofty-minded, the Bible is full of metaphorical expressions, predominantly in the revelation of John. Eternity, it is said, is like a big banquet with Jesus and pals, where food is served on plates of gold. But that is not so impressive, since apparently even the gutter is made of gold there. The trees are evergreen, and a river of life, a biblical parallel to the fountain of youth, is floating in heaven. And here the faithful will sing songs to God's glory together with the angels. I assume that is why Christians sing so much. Practice. An easy way to grasp the point would be to think of the best thing you can, and take that as a starting point, whereafter things just keep getting better. Now, there neatly packed is the Christian doctrine of apocalypse, and that is the antecedent to the idea of salvation and redemption. Apart from being the orgastic climax in the self-adoration of an omnipotent spirit, boosted by a bunch of mindless sycophantic winged creatures, this celestial circus lacks psychological appeal. But if someone believes that their summum bonum and reason for being is to court a tribal war god turned into a megalomaniac diva, that would be fine with me, were it not for the even less appealing alternative outcome of the apocalypse. This alternative, I dare say, is the only thing that can make heaven look less dull. Heaven is, as we all know, flanked by hell. We don't need to go through the philosophical details about eternity again, as they apply in the same manner for Lucifer as for Yahweh. There is, however, an important distinction between them, and that is in the modus of their respective progression. Whereas heaven offer an even increasing bliss, hell offer an ever increasing torment. The divergence between the two are thus escalating with geometric progression. I assume this is a device to secure that the wailing of the tormented never loom larger than the flattering of the angels. But more to the point is the fact that the torment of the damned, since it is ever continuing and thus ever escalating, soon will outnumber the collected suffering that ever took place on earth with 1,000,000,000 to 1. And as the fall down the abyss of nameless agony continues, the suffering of every individual soul in hell will eventually outnumber the collected calamities that ever took place in the entire universe with 1,000,000,000 gazillion to the fraction of a jot. Still the agony and fear of the lost hasn't come a speck closer to an end than it was the second they first arrived in hell. No amount of galaxies could offer space enough even to harbour the plumes of smoke from the burning flesh of the lost. Not all water in the world could suffice to quench the thirst of even one of them. The suffering in concentration camp prisons during the Nazi era will seem like a vacation, and the fear of the victims of plane hijackers will be as a relief in comparison. All this takes place while the feast in heaven gets more and more feverish. The song of the saved souls in praise of God's mercies goes from frantic exuberance to wild ecstasy and beyond. The banquets excel over each other in pomp and exotic dishes. The angels scratch God's back with ever softer wing feathers, and everyone is as happy can be. That is, the inhabitants in heaven. So here we are then. God's salvation turned out to be nothing more than a permanent perpetuation and an astronomical magnification of suffering. An ethical quagmire and a mind-blowing bankruptcy of the judicial principle of proportionality. God himself is most likely nothing more than the victim of his own vindicative and self-centered nature, a misfit in the firing of spiritual DNA. What worries me is instead his earthly following, which prides itself of being moral beings with a free will. What moral defense could possibly put up against the support of everlasting suffering, and for their part, according to Scripture, undeserved and lavish luxury? To point at God and God's will amount to nothing more than the abysmal poor defense Hitler's collaborators put forth when they, during the Nuremberg trials, charged with war crimes and genocide, said they only acted as the Führer's order. A moral agent bears an individual responsibility for whatever work he performs and whatever system of belief he promotes and upholds. Anyone who is capable of utter enjoyment and ever-increasing happiness, while people are punished beyond human comprehension and without end, is more morally reprehensible than ever Stalin and Hitler was. Indeed, Heinrich Himmler, the executioner, the head of a final solution, possessed more compassion than the Christians, since he reportedly felt physically ill whenever he had to visit a concentration camp. The Christians, on the other hand, in their immoral state, is supposed to feel joy and glee at the ghastliest spectacle ever to have occurred. While this is yet not a reality, and of course never is to be, their support for the doctrine of hell is a reality, and a reality that places them far outside the circle of mankind. With their doctrine They have denounced the one moral merit that even simple beast possesses, and that is compassion. With the words of Thomas Paine, belief in a cruel God makes a cruel man. Thank you for listening.